Decision podcasts by the New York Prosecutors Training Institute are made possible by Resemble AI. Convert your text to voice at resemble.ai. Find this and other decisions at NYPTI Law. www.nypti.org/law.
People v. George Baque, decided October 24, 2024. Halligan J. This case requires us to determine whether the Appellate Division properly conducted a weight of the evidence review of a conviction based solely on circumstantial evidence. Because the Appellate Division's opinion does not manifest a failure to apply the correct legal principle, we affirm: 1. George Baque's 5-month-old daughter was found unresponsive in her crib at 6:30 a.m. on July 30, 2016. Despite efforts to resuscitate her, she was declared dead. An autopsy revealed that the victim had sustained injuries consistent with abusive head trauma and violent shaking. Baque was arrested and charged with manslaughter in the second degree and endangering the welfare of a child. At trial, the people relied solely on circumstantial evidence, including testimony establishing that the defendant was the last person with the victim before she was found dead, that the victim died from cervical nerve root tearing which prevented her from breathing, and that she would have died within minutes of receiving her injuries. There was no evidence that anyone saw the defendant shake or hit the victim. The trial court gave the criminal jury instruction circumstantial evidence charge without objection. This instruction tells the jury to determine what facts, if any, have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, then what inferences, if any, can be drawn from those facts, and further that it must appear that the inference of guilt is the only one that can fairly and reasonably be drawn from the facts, and that the evidence excludes beyond a reasonable doubt every reasonable hypothesis of innocence. The defendant was convicted of criminally negligent homicide and endangering the welfare of a child. The defendant appealed, arguing that his conviction was against the weight of the evidence. The Appellate Division affirmed. A judge of this court granted leave to appeal, and we now affirm. 2. In a case that involves solely circumstantial evidence, the ultimate determination of guilt necessarily rests on inference. This type of reasoning differs from the credibility determinations for which the jury is superbly suited, People v. Kennedy. Although circumstantial evidence is no less reliable than direct evidence, a case that rests purely on circumstantial evidence presents a unique risk that the trier of facts may leap logical gaps in the proof offered and draw unwarranted conclusions based on probabilities of low degree, People v. Benzinger. As we have explained on numerous occasions, the circumstantial evidence instruction mitigates this risk. It requires the jury to test its inferences by ensuring that the inference of guilt is the only one that can fairly and reasonably be drawn from the facts, and that the evidence excludes beyond a reasonable doubt every reasonable hypothesis of innocence. People v. Sanchez. The jury must ask itself whether common human experience would lead a reasonable person, putting their mind to it, to reject or accept the inferences asserted for the established facts. Benzinger, quoting People v. Borrero. Proper application of the instruction by the jury does not impose a greater burden of proof than the traditional beyond a reasonable doubt formulation. Rather, it merely draws attention to the rigorous function which must be undertaken by the finder of fact when presented with a case of purely circumstantial evidence. People v. Barnes. The question before us is whether the Appellate Division erred as a matter of law in conducting its review of the weight of the evidence in this purely circumstantial case. Weight of the evidence review is a unique power afforded to intermediate appellate courts, and one that they exercise regularly, People v. Bleakley. It requires the Appellate Division to independently assess all the proof and to serve, in effect as a second jury, citing People v. Romero. As we have explained, the Appellate Division must first determine whether an acquittal would not have been unreasonable. If so, the court must weigh conflicting testimony, review any rational inferences that may be drawn from the evidence, and evaluate the strength of such conclusions. Based on the weight of the credible evidence, the court then decides whether the jury was justified in finding the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. People v. Danielson. The Appellate Division must afford deference to the fact-finder's opportunity to view the witnesses, hear the testimony, and observe demeanor. Romero. Although it may substitute its own credibility determinations for those made by the jury in an appropriate case. People v. De La Mota. In conducting a weight of the evidence review, the Appellate Division will, of course, ask whether the case is based upon purely circumstantial evidence. To be satisfied that the jury was justified in finding guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in a circumstantial evidence case, the appellate division must satisfy itself that the inference of guilt is the only one that can fairly and reasonably be drawn from the facts, and that the evidence excludes beyond a reasonable doubt every reasonable hypothesis of innocence. Sanchez. That proposition is not novel or controversial, and certainly does not require the appellate division to charge itself with the applicable jury instruction. The people conceded as much at oral argument, and the appellate division regularly and properly executes this task. 3. This court reviews a weight of the evidence determination to assess whether the order and writings of the Intermediate Appellate Court manifest a lack of application of its review power. Romero, quoting Bleakley. We cannot review a weight of the evidence challenge unless the Intermediate Appellate Court manifestly failed to consider the issue or did so using an incorrect legal principle. People v. Contrala. We have never required the appellate division to manifest its weight of evidence review power by writing in all criminal cases. Bleakley. Indeed, the appellate division could have summarily affirmed without explicitly addressing the merits of defendant's challenge to the weight of the evidence. Romero. Applying the above standard, we find no basis for reversal here. The appellate division's decision notes weight of the evidence precedent from this court, citing Danielson, People v. Mateo, Bleakley, and Romero. It recites the facts and proceedings below. It grapples with the circumstantial evidence presented to the jury, including that the defendant was the last person with the victim before she was found dead, that the victim's cause of death was severing of her cervical nerves, which caused her to stop breathing and die within minutes, and that her injuries were caused by violent, forceful shaking. Finally, it draws an inference of guilt, proven beyond a reasonable doubt, concluding that because she lost consciousness and died after the defendant cared for her, it was reasonable for the jury to conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant violently and forcefully shook her, causing her death. In arguing that the appellate division's ruling manifestly failed to apply its review power, the defendant and the dissent point to the use of the word reasonable in reference to the jury's finding of guilt. This word choice does not establish that the appellate division failed to evaluate inferences from circumstantial evidence with the same lens that the jury used. Bleakley demands more than this to show a manifest failure to apply the proper review power. People v. Sanchez, the incorrect language, in the context of the court's written decision as a whole, did not manifest a lack of application of that review power to which appellants are entitled. The defendant and the dissent also note that although the parties contested the appropriate application of the circumstantial evidence jury instruction to weight of the evidence review both in their briefs and at oral argument, the appellate division did not squarely address this point. See brief for defendant appellant. The dissent points to snippets of oral argument in asserting that this was the key issue at the appellate division. Bleakley makes crystal clear that our role is not to parse exchanges at oral argument in determining whether the appellate division properly conducted weight of the evidence review, that the court did not recite how it deals with circumstantial evidence when conducting weight of the evidence review does not warrant reversal, especially given that the appellate division had already done so in a prior case. See People v. Clavel. In sum, we confirm that the same tenets that the jury applies to circumstantial evidence during its deliberations also apply on weight of the evidence review, and that the Second Department's reasoning here does not manifest a lack of application of the proper standard. Sanchez, quoting Bleakley. The defendant also argues that the appellate division improperly applied a legal sufficiency analysis rather than a weight of the evidence review. Given the appellate division's reference to our weight of the evidence precedent, including Danielson, Mateo, Bleakley, and Romero, as well as to its statutory obligation under CPL 470.155, to determine, based on the facts, whether a verdict of conviction was against the weight of the evidence, we reject this contention. Accordingly, the order of the appellate division should be affirmed. Order affirmed. Opinion by Judge Halligan. Judges Rivera, Canataro, and Troutman concur. Judge Garcia concurs in result and in opinion. Judge Singas concurs in result in a separate opinion. Chief Judge Wilson dissents in an opinion. Decided October 24, 2024.
Decision podcasts by the New York Prosecutors Training Institute are made possible by Resemble AI. Convert your text to voice at resemble.ai. Find this and other decisions at NYPTI Law. www.nypti.org/law.